Hey folks, we're here to pick up the legume family today, known as Fabaceae. This family has a shocking amount of floral diversity. It is the third largest family in the world, after only the asters and the orchids. But relative to those two families, which are bigger, this family has way more floral diversity. They defy generalizations of really any attribute, in fact, really. Here is a look at what most of their fruits look like, though. One thing that they do all have in common is that they all have a gynecium of just a single carpel. That will become a fruit that we always call a legume. So that's where that common name legume family comes from. These seed pods, are also oftentimes called beans, and they hold seeds, and those seeds are often also called beans. So Fabaceae used to be known as Leguminosae, kind of before that ACEAE ending was formally recognized. There's about 20,000 species, and they're found cosmopolitan all the way around the globe, especially in the tropics. We have a huge representative of members of Fabaceae here in California. And when we're looking at members of California, the different species that we see around the state, Asteraceae is by far the biggest family in California, hands down. In fact, 12% of the species found in California are members of Asteraceae. Huge, huge proportion of the species of angiosperms found in California. This chart shows the cumulative addition here. So Poaceae doesn't have 21% of the species in California. Instead, they have kind of the difference between 12 and 21. So what is that? 9% of the species in California. So that means that Fabaceae has 6% of the species found in California. Cool. Next slide. Tofu. Tofu's a member of the Fabaceae. Tofu's made from soy. Soybeans are a staple food in the world. Noxious weeds, things that are hard to get rid of, those types of weeds. Also wood, rosewood. Well, you would think rosewood would be in Rosaceae. Surprisingly, it's not. Problem with common names. So back to that nitrogen fixation. That happens in the roots, but not really. It's not really done by the plant itself. It's done by mutualistic nitrogen-fixing bacteria that live in these root nodules that are found underground, like I said, attached to those roots. Here's a picture of a leaf of Fabaceae. What we can tell is that, like I said, this is just one leaf. Segments are so deeply lobed that we can definitely call this a compound leaf. We've got 3 leaflets here. And we have these sort of large swollen bodies at the base of each leaflet. Here's one that I'm circling. There's one on each of the bases of each of these leaflets here. And what these are they're called pulvini, or singular is pulvinus. They swell up with water, or they'll kind of release water from their bodies to sort of govern the orientation of the leaves. So sometimes members of this family will the leaves will follow the sun throughout the day, or maybe they'll use this water to close up at night and then open up during the day. They're able to kind of manipulate their leaves in fancy ways because of these pulvini. Like I said, there's a massive amount of variation in this family in terms of morphology, but we have a few generalizations. Lots of usuallys here, though. Notice that. Usually the leaves are compound, like you see in this picture, all sorts of compounds. Palmately, pinnately, twice, all the things. Blade margins, usually entire. Again, this picture is an example of that. We usually don't see serrate, dentate, crenate margins. The leaf bases generally tend to have those paired appendages that we call stipules. So we tend to see stipulate leaves. Now, sometimes these stipules are deciduous, short-lived, or very small. You might not notice them. And then the pulvini that we just talked about, those are going to be present on all of these. Again, those pulvini might be very small. They might not be as obvious as they are in this picture. Here's just an example. I have a lot of kind of pictures on this video that I wanted to show you. And this picture is nice because you can see the vegetative story, those compound leaves. Sometimes in this family, we see sort of a vine habit, And you can see kind of at the ends of each of these leaves, instead of there being a leaflet terminating at the end of the leaf, we have a tendril, and that's a sign that this is kind of a climbing plant. We have some flowers here. We're about to talk about that. And here are some of those fruits, those legumes. More fruits. Here you can definitely tell these are fruits because we've got those old crispy perianth part remnants left behind. And that ovary is just becoming swollen. Here's another example of a fruit. This is a really cool one that I found at a high elevation site near Mount Shasta. You can tell down here, these are the fruits. They sort of, these air bladders, and they have this really cool marbled effect. Cool fruits. We see something that might surprise you is that peanuts are fruits. Peanuts are fruits that actually make their way underground. This is a very, very unique situation that I don't know of in any other plant on Earth. Notice in this diagram on the right here, when the plant is in flower, the flowers are clearly above ground here. This is an above ground diagram. Imagine the ground level is, say, right here in this little diagram. Well, the flower gets pollinated, and then as the ovary is swelling and becoming the fruit, what happens is the ovary buries itself underground. And of course, that's where a seed needs to germinate anyway, so this might just be a way for them to get underground. Well, this is where peanuts come from. This is how folks have to harvest peanuts. Cool. Just a bunch of different examples of legumes. All sorts of dispersal agents. We've got ballistic, kind of explosive dispersal. Sometimes bats or other mammals are ingesting this, or it's getting attached to their fur. Birds, wind, water. Normally in this class we pick up families, genera, species, but in this family, Fabaceae, we're actually picking up a new kind of taxonomic rank, something called the subfamily. These are within the family, so there are multiple subfamilies. These are just kind of 3 examples of members of the family. And the 3 that we're picking up in plant tax that we have historically picked up are called Papilionoideae, Subfamily, and Mimosoideae. I know, they're kind of hard to say. Notice they all have that exact same ending though, that O-I-D-E-A-E, pronounced oidee. Okay, we're picking up all of these with one sort of exception. Notice how on this previous slide I had Subfamily as number 2. Well, actually, this has gone through a pretty recent name change because it is very, kind of jumping ahead, but it's very important for us to pick up this genus Cercis. This is called redbud, and historically had been in subfamily Subfamily. It is now in this new subfamily, so I'm going to kind of not officially pick up either one. We're still going to talk about the genus because that's what's important to us. Okay, back to number 1, Papilionoideae. We're picking up lupine and clover, or in other words, Lupinus and Trifolium. And in Mimosoideae, genus Acacia. Papilionoideae. Here's just a classic example of a local member of this subfamily. They don't have common names, really, the subfamilies. Here's another sort of ornamental look. Just showing you what members of the subfamily look like. Now, this is a flower that's a picture of a flower that's taken right outside of the greenhouse at HSU. Maybe you've seen this before. What you can see from this picture is, of course, well, first, the vegetation is what we would expect in Fabaceae, those compound leaves. Well, first of all, this over here, it's not a pepper, even though it looks like one. It's just an unopened flower. It's a flower bud. And what we can see, because it's not open, is the calyx. So right here, we've got those sepals. There are actually 5 fused sepals. That's pretty standard in the subfamily, actually pretty much in the family. And the next thing that we can see, the next layer in, are the petals, of course. We've got this large one up front that really is making this flower look strongly zygomorphic. The others we see are this one that's really down here and large, and then it's kind of hard to see in this picture. We've got these kind of 2 flappy ones here. Okay, we gotta talk about that corolla. But let's open up this flower before we talk about that. Here I have pulled back this lower part of the corolla, and I've exposed those sexual parts. So you can pretty clearly see the stamens here. Up here are the anthers, and then down here were sort of the filaments. Looks like there's one free one up here. More on the andrecium in a minute. The gynecium is this green structure that's kind of in the middle of those stamens, as expected. Well, what's going on here is that the corolla comes in these sort of 4 parts, and we've got different names for each one of these parts of the corolla because it's so prominent. It's such a distinctive feature of the subfamily that we actually have unique names for each one of these petals. So let's go. Okay, so on this slide, I'm going to diagram what the corolla looks like. So we were just talking about how this upper one sort of makes it look strongly zygomorphic, and then we've got these 2 on the side here, and then we've got this sort of larger lower structure. Those are all parts of the corolla, and since they are so unique in this family, we give them all fancy names. So that top part, which I had I think in purple, I'm going to kind of just draw their relative kind of outline of what they look like relative to one another so we can label them. This one is called the banner. That's that upper petal. The 2 kind of flappy ones that are below it are attached inside of the banner, and they're called wings. There are 2 of them. And the banner, let me just be super clear. The banner, there's 1. That big lower part that sort of made that flower look like a pepper, this part is called the keel. K-E-E-L. And it's surprisingly, it's actually 2 fused petals. So now we can kind of start our floral formula. We've talked about the fact that these flowers in this subfamily are strongly zygomorphic. They tend to have 5 fused sepals. They do have 5 total petals, but we can be more specific than that since we just talked about that. We can say, for the corolla, we can say 1 for that banner, plus 2 for the wings, plus 2 fused for that keel. Fix that. Okay, and now we need to talk more about the andrecium before we put that part of the floral formula in. Let's see. Sometimes in members of this subfamily, the andrecium looks like this. What is happening is we have 10 total stamens, but the lower 9, these ones down here, are all fused. And then this one up here is all alone on it by itself. So we've got 9 fused and 1 free. So let me erase that. So we've got the 9 plus 1, which equals 10. When this is the case, we call this andrecium, we call it sort of 2-parted, right? The one part is that upper free stamen, and the other part are those 9 fused stamens. And the botanical term for a 2-parted andrecium is diadelphous. Let's write that word. Okay, the other look of the andrecium, other species, just some species have a diadelphous andrecium, and the other species in the subfamily have what's called a monadelphous andrecium. And this is when you don't have that free stamen. Instead, all 10 of those stamens are fused. And again, this lower one down here is called monadelphous. If you look at the roots of these words, di, 2, and mon, 1, kind of makes sense. Okay, so now we can finish that part of the rest of the floral formula down here. The andrecium is definitely going to be 10, but it's either going to be 10 fused or 9 plus 1 with the 9 fused. So kind of a complicated part of the andrecium here, since we're trying to make a general floral formula for the entire subfamily. Okay, and now the gynecium. Here's one nice thing, always consistent throughout the whole family, not just the subfamily Papilionoideae, but the whole family Fabaceae is always going to have this gynecium for their part of for their flowers and for whenever you're writing the floral formulas. One carpel, superior ovary. No need for fusion, nothing to be fused to itself when there's just one. Okay, so here's some other looks of members of this subfamily. Okay, our first genus that we're going to pick up in the subfamily is called Lupinus. The common name for this genus is lupin or lupine. Okay. In this genus, we see the 10 fused. And when that's the case, in terms of the andrecium, sorry, we have 10 fused stamens. When that is the case, pollinators actually don't have access to the nectar that is produced sort of closer to the ovary. They can't kind of get in without that upper free stamen. And so the reward for pollinators in lupine and all other members of the subfamily that have the 10 fused stamens, the reward to the pollinator is just pollen, actually. Kind of surprising. Usually pollinators are more interested in nectar, but the pollen is actually pretty high quality, and a lot of insects are interested in it. So Lupinus is a pretty big genus, especially here in California. We have a really big representative of the genus here in California. You can figure that out by opening up the Jepson manual and noticing that the key is kind of daunting. It's pretty big. We have a lot of native species, some rare, some extremely rare and endemic to California. Almost always in this genus, we're going to have a raceme inflorescence, which you can kind of see in this picture. There's Holmes, my dog, trying to help me find some of our members of Fabaceae for you all. In this picture, you can really see something that's important about this genus, which is the fact that they're always going to have palmately compound leaves. You can see that kind of down here, down here. They're not just palmately lobed, they're compound. So this is an always thing for the genus. Not for the family, but definitely for the genus. This is nice because sometimes you'll see this genus and it's not flowering or fruiting, and so you're not really sure what it is. But if you've got those palmately compound leaves, pretty good hint that you're looking at a member of this genus. Here's another just sort of look. Again, you can really clearly see those palmately compound leaves and that raceme inflorescence. Here's a close-up of the flowers. And here's just a picture of those fruits. Legumes, again, that's one of the nice consistent things in the family. We're always going to call the fruit type a legume. Okay, your second required genus in subfamily Papilionoideae is the genus Trifolium. This one is called clover. Maybe you've heard of clover. Something you might know about clover is that they almost always have 3 leaflets. That's what clovers are. They're single leaves with 3 leaflets. There are some exceptions to that. Some members of Trifolium have more than 3 leaflets, surprisingly. Something that I'll tell you about the andrecium of Trifolium is that it has the other type. It has the diadelphous type of andrecium, unlike lupine. It's got the 9+1 with the 9 all fused to each other. And so the reward to pollinators is both pollen and nectar. With that upper stamen being able to be kind of released and moved around, those pollinators do have access to nectar. Here's just a picture that looks really busy, and it's just a cool picture showing 4 different species of Trifolium all growing right next to each other. These species tend to be very weedy, from my experience. Here's a picture of a nice herbarium specimen from our teaching collection showing those leaves. So again, like I had said, we should write it down though. The leaves of Trifolium are almost always trifoliolate, meaning compound leaves with 3 leaflets. All right. Here's just another look. We're almost always going to have many, many tiny flowers condensed onto a very dense head, or maybe a very dense umbel, or sometimes even more of a dense raceme. In this picture, we've removed a single flower and put it under the microscope. And here you can sort of see this one oddball stamen that's sticking out away from the other ones. That's that one free stamen. And then back here, there's those fused sepals. Here's that banner. And in this picture, we can kind of see that that part is the keel. And we've got our two wings. There's one wing and the other wing. Cool. Wings you can see kind of more clearly over here. There's a wing, and there's another wing on that flower. And here's that sort of banner up above those wings. And there's the little keel right in the middle. Okay. So the next important required genus for us is Cercis. The common name for this one is redbud. And we'll talk about why it's got that common name. This one has a very different look of the flower. You can tell because, first of all, the banner, which I think I did in purple earlier, the banner is actually inside of the wings in this genus. So here are the wings, sort of looking like Mickey Mouse ears, and then the banner is actually attached inside of them. And then the keel is two petals, just like it was in Papilionoideae, but this time they're actually not fused. They're just overlapping. So we've got these two keel petals. Again, we've got those two wings. And then, again, we have the one banner. The 5 fused sepals. Okay. This is why it's called redbud. The first thing that happens early in the spring before it puts out leaves, since this is a deciduous tree, is it puts out these beautiful bright magenta flowers, which is what gives it that common name, redbud. Here we have done a longitudinal section right through the flower showing that it's got actually 10 stamens. They're all free from each other. We don't have conation at all, like we did in Papilionoideae. Here's a picture showing those fruits and their leaves. Now, these are clearly an exception to the compound sort of trend that we see in Fabaceae. Cercis, redbud, they actually have simple leaves. Sorry. Here's a nice herbarium specimen showing that even over time, that bright magenta color really stays well in our herbarium specimen. This one was collected in 1990. And there's those fruits. Here's a better look at the leaves. Something else about those leaves, yes, they're simple. Another thing about them is that they have two pulvini, actually. They have one of those swollen bodies at the top of the petiole and another one at the base of the petiole where it attaches to the stem. Okay, and then the last genus in this family is in a third subfamily. It's called Mimosoideae. Acacia is the important name for this one. The common name of acacia is usually just plain old acacia. That works. Oops, A-C-A-C-I-A. But they also have this cool common name. People also sometimes call it wattle, or some species have the common name wattle. That always makes me laugh a little bit, thinking about. Now, when we're looking at the sort of same type of diagram that we thought about for, let me go back to that picture. Like the diagram with the banner and the keel, we actually don't have any of those specialized types of petals in this entire subfamily, including in the genus Acacia. Instead, what we see are 5 sort of more or less equal petals. Well, those last ones didn't really turn out that equal. 5 more or less equal petals. And we generally have 5 sepals as well in this subfamily, so kind of no need to have special terms for the petals here, any perianth parts. What we're looking at, these fancy structures over here that look like pom-poms, they're actually clusters of dozens and dozens of individual flowers. So we tend to have very small flowers in Acacia. And you see how some of these are they're kind of sticking out, like there's these little tiny ones. You can see them a little better right there. Those are actually the stigmas of each one of the flowers. And then the vast majority of the yellow color that we're seeing is coming from filaments. The stamens in this genus and this whole subfamily are what are responsible for being showy and attractive to pollinators. Usually it's the perianth. Here, you can't even see the perianth. You're never going to see it. It's extremely tiny. The andrecium is entirely responsible for attracting pollinators by being showy. So that's something that's kind of new. Those stamens being showy is important. Also the fact that we have many stamens. Unlike those other two subfamilies we talked about, where those two had 10 stamens, we see many stamens in this genus. Usually those many tiny flowers are condensed into a head or a tiny raceme or a spike like you see here. Here's a picture of their fruits. Now something we can see in this picture are their leaves. They're almost always going to have pinnately compound leaves. A lot of times the leaves are twice pinnately compound or 3 times pinnately compound. You can see in this picture they are twice pinnately compound. I had to think about that for a sec. The fruits, they're classic legumes. We always know that. In this family, we're always going to call fruits legumes. They're derived from a single carpel. That's no surprise. Something that's really cool about acacia that I wanted to end with is the fact that some acacias that are in the tropics have a very special relationship with ants. The ants act as an army for the tree and they fight off herbivores. And in exchange for having this army, the tree provides safe homes for the ants to lay their eggs and raise babies in. So you can see in this picture, this is actually a giant thorn being produced by the plant, and they're entirely hollow. So that is a safe, protected area where this ant can go lay some eggs and raise some larvae. Cool. Also, the leaves can be really complex. Sometimes the petiole is actually what ends up being the most photosynthetic part of the leaf. This is actually a petiole, and this is a very fancy thing that's only found in some species of acacia, and it's called a phylode. All right, that was my last slide. Peace out.